Let's talk about homeschool math. I feel like this is maybe the hardest subject for people to decide on what curriculum they want to use, for a couple of different reasons. The first is that we all take math very seriously, as we should, because we want our kids to have a good solid foundation and math skills. They will be using these skills for the rest of their lives. And the other reason is when we compare math curriculum books to other subjects such as science or history, maybe even language arts, the math book doesn't always look quite as flashy and pretty as some of the other subjects do, because we're just dealing with numbers. With so many different options out there, I want to dive into 3 different math curriculums that we have used in our homeschool over the last few years. They are teaching textbooks, Math with Confidence, and Saxon. So as I go through each one, I will be sharing some of my personal pros and cons that I have seen based on experience. And as always, if you have any specific questions about anything I'm discussing today, please be sure to drop those in the comments below. And while you're there, also hit the like and subscribe button. First up, let's talk about teaching textbooks. This is a program my son used during his 4th and 5th grade years, and then my daughter used it during 3rd grade. What initially drew us to teaching textbooks, and this is probably a reason a lot of other families use it, is that it can all be done through an app on your computer or tablet. So although it is mostly screen-based, they do also offer printed workbooks that you can buy in addition for each lesson. We just did not choose that option. Obviously, since it is screen-based and very attractive looking, many kids are drawn to that, like mine were, at least for a little while, but we'll get to that in just a minute. They also like that there are different ways to customize the appearance of teaching textbooks. So they can choose different things like their backgrounds and their stickers. They can even customize the different sound effects that it will make when they get answers either right or wrong. Now the lesson part itself, where you hear just a man's voice in the background teaching each lesson, is actually pretty short. Those only last maybe around 5 minutes, and then the kids move on to do independent practice problems, usually around 20 or so. Teaching textbooks is very convenient for the parent. So when we started this just a couple years ago, I was kind of in this place with homeschooling, all that we had going on, me working part-time. I just felt like I needed just one subject to be taken off of my plate where he could work on something totally independently. And it did work really well for that. And he liked it so much, in fact, that the next year I decided to add my daughter when she started in 3rd grade. For a while, this worked out great for us, especially last school year. I knew that we were going to be traveling a whole lot. We were going to be gone from home for several months, and we just did not have a chance to bring all the school books with us. So at that time, it just made sense to have both kids using the program because all we needed was an iPad to bring. When we returned home after the fall semester, this is where things kind of started to unravel a bit with teaching textbooks. My daughter in particular, and this really surprised me because she hadn't been using it very long at all, but I feel like very quickly the shine of the app wore off for her. And in fact, she kind of started dreading using it because she really didn't like the sound effects that it would make, in particular when she missed a problem. So I guess we could have had the option to just turn sound effects off, but it bothered her so much that she started asking to not use that app anymore. I knew at that point we would be going ahead and switching back to just a regular workbook for the following school year. Another thing was she is my very hands-on learner. She needs to experience and manipulate math in that way. So if you're always doing something on a screen, then it's not really so good for your hands-on learners. Then, shortly after that, my son started to dislike the program as well. And his main complaint was that the lesson part, the teaching part itself, was actually too short. So he would say things like, you know, they just explain something really fast and they give you 2 or 3 example problems and then just expect you to go off and know how to work it on your own. So he actually started asking me to print each individual lesson and teach it to him, which of course I was glad to do that because I wanted to make sure that he was understanding things. But then it defeated my original purpose, which was for him to work on math independently. So at that point in the school year, I just said, hey, listen, we're not going to switch this late into the year, but we definitely will consider other options for next year. And so for 6th grade, we did ultimately switch to Saxon. Teaching textbooks did not turn out to be the best fit for our family, but like everything else out there, it has its pros and cons. So let's go ahead and list those here. Some of the pros for teaching textbooks is it's very budget friendly. I think for an entire year subscription, you pay about $45, which is incredibly reasonable. I also like that they have an option for you to pause the app for a certain period of time. So like if you know you're taking a long holiday or vacation, or just a few weeks that you're taking a break from school and you're not going to be using it, you do have that option to pause it and then restart. It does appeal to a lot of kids because, again, it looks very gamified. The lessons themselves do not take very long to complete, maybe around 20 minutes a day. And here's one thing that I really do like. If you go on their website, you can download a free trial of any level of math in teaching textbooks, and you get the entire first 15 lessons to try for free so that you can, give yourself and give your kids a chance to see what they like about it. Some of the cons for teaching textbooks. If your kids are like mine, they may not like always that immediate feedback with the sound effects that it gives them. Also, I found if you are not the one teaching the lessons to them, you may not always know what particular areas of math they are struggling with. So yes, it does email you a weekly report of their lessons, and so you can see, what their overall score was. You can see the problems that they missed. But if you are not side by side with them during the lessons, then you may not be as tuned in to what they need help with. The last thing is, some people will criticize teaching textbooks for being too light and not very rigorous. I'm not sure if I completely agree with that. I see what they're saying because, again, the lessons are so short. But I will say, my son had used it for 2 years, then he took his first standardized test at the end of 5th grade, and he didn't just do well, he did really well in math after having used that for a couple of years. So I personally feel like it was sufficient. I think it prepared him really well to be able to take that test. My last point on this curriculum is kind of neutral. It could be a pro or a con depending on your family. So the fact that it is screen-based, well, if your kids really hate math and they're looking for something more interesting, more gamified, then they could enjoy using it through the app. But on the other hand, if your kids already are used to doing a whole lot of their schoolwork on a screen, then they might feel a little bit burnt out on another screen-based curriculum. And especially, again, for those hands-on learners, it might be best not to use another thing on a device. Next, let's take a look at Math with Confidence. This year, I switched my daughter back to it for 4th grade because we had already used it a couple years ago in 2nd grade, and we both really enjoy this program. Now, fair warning, it is quite teacher/parent intensive, so it's the opposite of teaching textbooks. And that could be a pro or a con for you. If you have a lot of kids that you're homeschooling, it does take more time for you to teach the lessons. But we'll get to the actual lesson format in just a moment. Here's what you get. You'll need the instructor's guide along with workbooks A and B for the student. If you are buying these books at full price, usually it costs around $90 to $100 for an entire level. But I will say that I have found several different websites that are always offering these at a discounted price, so I would say the overall cost is still pretty reasonable. In particular, I want to highlight the instructor's guide because I feel like it is so well done. The author, Kate Snow, does such a good job of giving really simple, clear instructions to the parent who's teaching this. So she gives great examples, like word for word, how to explain different concepts, and it's very user-friendly. Also, each lesson format looks the same and it's very predictable. So once you get used to it and you've been using it for a while, it can become a very open and go curriculum. Let's go ahead and turn the camera around now so I can show you what an example lesson format looks like. I'm going to show you one of the lessons from Book B because we haven't started on it yet this school year. So let's take a look at lesson 9.1. Again, I really like that these workbooks have a very predictable lesson format. So always the first part is your lesson activities, which you can see with this little 2% symbol here. This is the part that the parent is meant to teach. And almost always you're going to find some type of game when they're introducing something new. Next we have the practice section, which it has one person icon. It kind of depends on how new the material is, so sometimes I will still be going over this page with my child, and then sometimes she's able to do it independently. When we get over here to the review page, again, one person icon, and this is where they're going to go back and revisit some of the older concepts that they've already learned. I really love how this program is spiral based, because like right now we're in, I think, Unit 4, and she's working on these fractions and mixed numbers. So even though this would be something she learned several weeks or even months ago, they're always going back and reviewing old concepts so that you don't forget them. As you can see, the pages are really cute and colorful, so lots of illustrations. But at the same time, I don't feel like the pages are cluttered, with too much information on them. I think they're still very easily readable, and I think my daughter really likes that. It's very attractive and inviting. Let's look at this same lesson now with the instructor guide next to it to accompany with instructions. So as we begin Unit 9, I can see that we're learning about length. So I get an overview of the entire unit, what my child is going to learn, the list of different lessons, and then extra materials that I might need for this unit. Again, something I really love about the author Kate Snow is she gives very straightforward, very clear directions about how to teach a concept. So if you look, all these words that are written in bold are actually words that you would read out loud to your child. And you can see all the different activities that you're going to do on each page with the answers provided. You can see here game instructions. Now let's flip ahead towards the end of this entire unit, Unit 9. Now let's flip ahead. So towards the end of this unit, Unit 9, we have our answer key to all the different problems. And that's both for the practice and the review pages. And then let me go back here because I want to talk about the enrichment lessons, which are optional. We really haven't done many of these yet just because of our schedule, but I really like this because this is where we get some of the hands-on or more real-life math applications. And some of these are really just fun and creative. For example, this enrichment activity says create your own length units. So today you get to invent 2 of your own length units. One unit will be a longer unit like feet or meters. The other unit will be a shorter unit like inches or centimeters. So the child gets to be creative and come up with their own terms. We have one grab. Well, what would that measure? Or what about a bloop? And so they're going to create this chart based on their own measurements about how much length that would cover. They can practice adding and subtracting. So again, it's just kind of another fun, creative way to practice the concepts that they're already learning. One thing I'm admittedly not great about doing with this program is looking ahead to see what types of materials we're going to need for each lesson, especially if there's a game involved. Now, I have found that I've mostly just been able to use things that we already owned, such as a set of base 10 blocks, the geometric shapes. We always need dice for just about every game, and then like a deck of playing cards. So I've been able to get away with it without having to buy extra stuff, but that could potentially be something you would need to invest in if you don't already own any type of math manipulatives. Still, I would just encourage you before you go out and buy a bunch of stuff to look inside the instructor's manual, see what kinds of supplies and materials she suggests, and then go ahead and look around your house and see what kinds of things do we already own or we could make it work. One more thing I want to mention before I jump into the pros and cons of Math with Confidence. I'm going to put a link to a video right here that I made recently about how you can adapt any homeschool curriculum to fit your family's needs. So if you look on page 7 of the instructor's manual right here, where she talks about scheduling, she also answers this question: how can I adjust the lessons to best fit my child and my schedule? I really feel like the author, again, it's Kate Snow, she put so much thought into this very thing. I feel like she's very understanding of how, no 2 homeschool families are the same, no 2 children in the same family have the same needs. So I really love that she addresses that right here at the beginning of the instructor's guide. Here are some of the pros for Math with Confidence. It is pretty reasonably priced because you can usually find books on sale. The lessons do not take too long. They're not overwhelming. I would say on average we spend maybe 30 to 40 minutes a day on math, depending on if we do all the things involved. After you've been using it for a while, it can become very open and go. And here is my absolute favorite thing about this program. It is spiral based, meaning there is so much daily review built into it. So kids always have an opportunity, besides learning the new concepts, they're always going to go back, spiral back, and revisit some of the older things that they've learned in math. So it really does keep them sharp on their skills. Honestly, I don't really have that many cons for this program, other than the fact that it is a bit more teacher intensive, but even those lesson parts don't have to take that much time each day. And as I mentioned earlier, if you don't already own some of these math manipulatives, you could end up spending a little bit of extra money on those things. Now, for a neutral point, I just want to mention the fact that this curriculum is very colorful. It is very cutesy looking, lots of graphics and illustrations, and I like that. My daughter likes that. I could potentially see it being a turnoff to boys though. This is just my opinion. But the fact that it looks so cutesy and elementary, I think is great for girls. Had I used this same book with my son when he was in 4th grade or whatever grade, I'm not sure it would have had the same appeal to him. Last, we've come to Saxon Math, which is what my 6th grader is using this year. Of the 3 curriculums that I'm talking about in this video, it is by far the most intense math program. It is also the oldest curriculum of the 3. So I think the original version was published like back in the 1980s, and obviously it's gone through revision since then, but some people would see that as a plus because it's been around a long time, and you could argue that it is a very tried and true program that a lot of people have had success with. But Saxon Math was brand new to us this year, and having come from something else like teaching textbooks, it was a huge change. So we went from something that was all screen-based and quite a bit lighter on the difficulty scale to Saxon, which is old school format, right? Everything is black and white. It's very simple and straightforward, lots of components to each lesson, and it takes much longer to complete the daily lessons. So I'm not saying that it was a bad change. We have been happy with it so far, but it definitely took some getting used to because we were coming from something totally different. For each level of Saxon Math, you need 3 things. This is the main student text, which you can tell I bought used because it's had a lot of wear and tear. You also need the solutions manual with all your answers to everything, as well as the tests and worksheets booklet. Now, I personally don't love that there are so many different parts to it. I kind of wish it could be all combined into one, but that would ultimately result in a giant book. This is also one of the more expensive math programs. So as I mentioned, I bought mine used off of Facebook and got a pretty good deal on it. But if you look at the new prices for this curriculum online, it's going to run you upwards of $130, which could end up being more if you decide to use an add-on tutoring service. What do I mean by that? Well, you may have noticed that out of all those different books, there is no specific teacher's guide. So what I had read before is that the main lesson part in Saxon is expected to be taught by an experienced math teacher. Maybe that's not a big deal in the younger years, but as we were just starting this program in middle school, it really caught me by surprise. I was expecting for there to be laid out instructions for the parent or teacher, and there were none. So this is the reason that many families who use Saxon will eventually decide to add on a service. 3 of the most popular ones are Nicole the Math Lady, Dive Into Math, and My Math Assistant. Now, I'm going to put a link here from Science Mama Angie, her YouTube channel, where she does a really good job of explaining what you get with those 3 different add-on programs. At the beginning of the school year, I did kind of look at each one and I tried some of their trial lessons, but ultimately I decided not to use any for this year. I decided that I'm just going to teach the lessons myself until I feel like I can't anymore. So thankfully I was pretty good at math growing up in school, but at some point I probably will reach it, probably closer to high school, where I start looking at the lesson plans and going, I don't feel capable of doing this myself anymore, and at that point I will surely seek out some extra resources. Okay, let's flip the camera around now so we can see an example lesson from Saxon Math. Here we're looking at Lesson 55, Common Denominators Part 1. So again, Saxon follows a very predictable pattern for each of its lessons. So you'll begin with facts practice, and it shows you which page you're going to find that on in your other book here. So it's 28 improper fractions to simplify. So the child is expected to do that independently, and you can time them to see how quickly they do it. This is followed by mental math, which we would just do these practice problems out loud, as well as problem solving. So we've got some real life application here. And then this is where we get into the actual teaching a new concept. Now, some children might be able to just read these pages with the new concept and look at examples and be able to learn it on their own. That is not typically how we use it. I use this as the actual teaching a lesson, and we'll work through some of the examples and solutions on a separate piece of paper. Next, we get to lesson practice, and this will vary. Sometimes it's as few as 4 or 5 problems, sometimes it could be 10. After that, you have your mixed practice problem set, which is usually 30 problems total. That's pretty much the same in every lesson. Now, here's what I really love. If you kind of zoom in here and look underneath each problem number, it shows another number in parentheses. So if my student has forgotten, oh, how am I supposed to find or compare these different numbers? Well, I can look back. This was originally taught in lesson 9 and lesson 38. So if we need to know where to go back to find how to do those problems, I love that they give you this guide here. So again, as you can see, it's very simple and straightforward, not a whole lot of colors except for maybe just this red, but it has a very simple look to it. And I've read that most people, including ourselves, don't actually write in the student book because they might want to be able to use it for another child or resell it. So we usually just work our practice problems on a separate sheet of paper. Another thing I wanted to show is an example of an investigation in Saxon. So I think these usually come about after every 10th lesson and right before they take a test on that unit. But this is really where you start to get some of the real life application or more hands-on practice with your math skills. So investigation 6, we're looking at attributes of geometric solids. So you could find some manipulatives around your house, or maybe you already own some of these shapes. And it's just a good way to talk about and experience some of these things that you have been working on. And always be looking for ways to relate it to their real life, right? So maybe your child has played Tetris. Maybe they play Minecraft, and you can start to relate some of these concepts that they've been learning about. So investigations are optional, but we have found them really useful. Because this program is very thorough with plenty of practice problems and extra components in each lesson, it does take quite a bit longer to complete. So you can easily spend an hour on math, if not more, every day if you're doing all the different parts. Now, one of the things that I talk about in that video that I mentioned earlier about adapting curriculum is I address how we use Saxon Math. One of the components that we personally leave out are the daily facts practice sheets. And if you go back and watch that video, I explain why. I've also heard about other families who don't want to spend quite as long on the practice problem sets. They will maybe choose a couple different things. They might say, hey, on day 1, you're going to do all of the even problems, and then on day 2, you're going to do all of the odd problems. So it cuts down a little bit on the amount of time your kids have to spend on math every day. We don't do it exactly the same way because what I prefer to do is look ahead to all the practice problems, and I will just go through and circle the particular ones that I want my son to complete. And my reason for that is if we only do the odds or the evens, I feel like a lot of stuff can easily get skipped. But if I look at them ahead of time, I know which particular skills or types of problems he needs more work on. And so I found that to be a more effective way. We still cut down on some of the workload, but I'm making sure that I'm addressing the skills that he needs. Okay, pros for Saxon Math. Like I said earlier, it is an older, very tried and true method that a lot of people have used before. And I really like how it also has the spiral review built into it. So if you look to the left of each practice problem, it actually lists the lesson number that concept was originally taught. So if you're needing to go back and check out a particular thing, you know where to go find it. So it's got a lot of review built into it, and I really like that. It is very methodical, very thorough, like your kid will be very well prepared by Saxon. And I also do like the investigations that they include at the end of each unit, because this is really where your kids can start to see kind of the real life application of math and how we would use it in different situations. Some of the cons for Saxon would be that it is a more expensive curriculum, and it is more teacher intensive unless you are choosing to add on one of those tutoring services, but in that case you're going to be spending more money on top of it as well. And because there are so many different daily components to each lesson, it can take quite a while to complete. Now I will note, this has just been our experience because we started at level 6, where I feel like had we started much earlier in elementary school, it may not have felt quite so overwhelming. As we wrap up this video, I just want to reiterate that so much of this comes down to finding what is going to be a good fit for your family. And if you have any particular questions about teaching textbooks, Math with Confidence, or Saxon Math, please remember to drop those in the comments, and be sure you're subscribed to Morning Basket Music for more homeschool encouragement. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.